My name is Harmony. I'm 36 years old, an anesthesiologist living and working in Oregon. 2 months ago, I held a memorial for my mother, tears still fresh on my face. And yet, just yesterday afternoon, while I was volunteering at a remote medical station in Arizona, my phone rang unexpectedly. On the other end was Franklin, my stepfather, the man who had destroyed every shred of peace in our family. His voice was disturbingly gleeful. I sold the cabin, paid off my debts, all taken care of. The cabin he was talking about was the last thing I had left of my mother. What he didn't know was that it held a secret I had never shared. Have you ever had something precious ripped away by a family member, right after a loss you hadn't even had time to grieve? If you have, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because what happened next didn't just make him pay. It changed the way I see my entire family. I ended the call and just stood there, frozen in the cracked, dusty ground of Arizona's mountain region, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I no longer saw the medical station or the patients around me. All I could picture was a small wooden cabin nestled among the Colorado pines, the one my mother and I had repaired with our own hands, where we hung every curtain, placed every painting, and sat together each night by the fire sharing stories. That place wasn't real estate. It was memory. It was the quiet my mother clung to in her final years. And now Franklin claimed he'd sold it like it was just some old chair tossed into a yard sale. Franklin wasn't my father. My biological father, Henry, was a quiet, gentle man who worked as a mechanical engineer. He died in a workplace accident when I was 9. My mother nearly fell apart after his funeral, but somehow she kept going, for me. A few years later, Franklin showed up like a toxic breeze, smooth, polite, and disturbingly good at making people feel comforted. He said he was from Montana and worked in finance, or at least that's what he told us. At first, my mother hesitated, but Franklin knew how to fill emotional voids. He knew when to talk about loneliness, when to share stories of loss, and when to quietly pour another glass of wine. I never trusted him. When my mother said she planned to remarry, I was 15. I didn't cry or protest, I just stayed silent. But something cold settled in me that never left. Franklin moved in with his expensive watch, imported whiskey, and a promise to treat my mother like a treasure. But just months after the wedding, I caught him handing someone a thick envelope of cash at our front door when he thought no one was watching. Then came the late-night phone calls in his locked office. My mother didn't know. Or maybe she did but couldn't bear to admit it. It wasn't until he accidentally dropped a gambling debt notice from Vegas that she began asking questions. Franklin called it a small mistake, something he'd fix. Fix it with what? With my mother's wedding jewelry. I remember the day she opened the drawer and just stood there, silent, her lips trembling. She told me she had pawned it to help Franklin pay off a debt. Just this once, sweetie, she whispered, unable to meet my eyes. But that just once stretched out over nearly a decade. When I got accepted into medical school, she said she couldn't help me financially. I didn't blame her. But watching Franklin still drive a sports car and buy premium scotch, something inside me clenched. I studied, I worked, I pushed through it all while swallowing the bitterness. I stayed quiet because my mother told me, don't let adult problems turn you resentful. Focus on your future. The Colorado mountain cabin was a different kind of memory. My dad had bought it as a weekend retreat. After he died, my mother and I went there every summer. We rebuilt the deck, planted rows of lavender by the porch, painted the attic floor by hand. We treated it like sacred ground because to us it was. After marrying Franklin, my mother visited less, but she always kept a key and told me, this place is ours. Just ours. 2 years ago, when her health began to fail, she called me home. She sat on the armchair by the fireplace and handed me a sealed envelope. These are the cabin documents, she said softly. I've transferred half into your name. The other half is held in a trust. If anything happens to me, you'll have full authority. Just promise me you won't sell it for the first 5 years. I asked her why. She looked out the window at the snow-covered pines and whispered, because some things shouldn't be lost too quickly, Harmony. That cabin is the last piece of your father. She passed away 62 days ago. A stroke while she was having her morning tea. Franklin informed me with a curt text, she's gone. Funeral on Thursday. No tears. No condolences. At the service, he never once mentioned the cabin. I was still holding myself together, lost in grief, not even thinking about property. And now, with one cold phone call, he claimed to have sold the one place my mother held sacred. No permission. No notice. Franklin assumed I'd stay quiet like before. That I'd nod out of exhaustion. But what he didn't realize was that the cabin wasn't entirely his anymore. And he certainly didn't know that I still had a copy of the trust. Every clause, every signature my mother had carefully secured. I didn't know how Franklin managed to sell the cabin, or who he sold it to. But I knew one thing for sure: he'd crossed a line. And I wasn't the same 15-year-old girl hiding behind her mother anymore. I was the rightful heir. The keeper of her last promise. And I wasn't about to let anyone, especially Franklin, destroy what we had protected. This wasn't going to end with a phone call. I packed my bags in less than an hour, canceled the rest of my volunteer schedule, and booked the earliest flight back to Colorado. I barely blinked on the plane. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined strangers tearing down my mother's framed photos, unscrewing chairs I had built by hand, burning logs she had split with her own strength during that last bitter winter. I tried to stay calm, but inside a storm raged. From the airport, I rented a car and drove straight toward the mountains, following the winding dirt road that led to the cabin we knew so well. The closer I got, the tighter my chest became. The sky was gray that day, and a light, silken rain tapped against the windshield. I turned off the radio, letting the hum of tires and wind carry me into the silence of the forest. The cabin appeared behind the trees, but something felt immediately wrong. The chestnut-colored wooden gate had been replaced by a steel fence that clashed with everything around it. The small sign I had carved by hand, Ira's Place, was gone. In its place, a white plastic board messily written, Private Property. No trespassing. I felt a chill as I stepped out of the car, my shoes sinking into damp pine needles. When I reached the porch, I saw the front door had been replaced entirely. The old wooden handle, the familiar creak of the hinges, they were gone. I rang the bell. No one came. I knocked. No answer. I pushed gently. The door swung open. Inside, the cabin was completely unfamiliar. A cold gray sofa. Walls repainted with some generic cream color. My mother's pictures gone, replaced by framed abstract art. The handmade wool rug we wove together under the coffee table? Gone. Each step I took felt like stepping on memories that had been stripped away and buried in a cold grave. Excuse me? Who are you? I turned sharply. A woman around my age stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a cup of coffee, her expression guarded. Behind her was a tall man in a hoodie holding a moving box. I took a breath and kept my voice steady. My name is Harmony. This cabin belongs to my family. I just flew in from Arizona. Who gave you permission to be here? The woman hesitated briefly, then said, We're the new owners. We bought this cabin from a man named Franklin. He said he was your stepfather. We paid the deposit, signed the contract. Is there a problem? I stared at her, stunned. You bought this cabin? When? About 2 weeks ago, the man replied. Franklin told us it was abandoned and the co-owner lived out of state and didn't care anymore. I looked around the room, my heart breaking. And you believed him? You didn't check ownership documents? Land records? We have our own attorney, the woman said, her tone suddenly sharper. The contract is clear. If you have an issue, take it up with Franklin, not us. I stepped back, my hands clenched. This cabin is co-owned by me and a trust in my late mother's name. Franklin had no legal authority to sell it. If you truly signed something with him, I'm afraid you were misled. The man took a step forward, eyes narrowing. Look, we don't want trouble. We bought it fair and square. If you have proof, send it to our lawyer. But for now, I suggest you leave. I took a deep breath, swallowing the fury bubbling inside me. I'll leave, but you'd better brace yourselves. This transaction isn't valid. I'll contact the property registry and the sheriff's office. And if I have to, I'll take this to court. I walked out fast, the door slamming shut behind me like a cold slap from reality. I stood in front of the cabin, eyes burning, heart in knots. Mom, what have they done to this place? To the memories, the warmth, everything you fought so hard to hold on to? I got back in the car and pulled out my phone, dialing Monica's number. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Harmony, you made it back already? My voice tightened as I struggled to stay calm. I'm here. And you won't believe this. The cabin's been broken into. Someone's living there. They said they bought it from Franklin. There was a brief silence. Then Monica burst out, "Damn it. I need you to pull up the ownership records. There has to be a way to prove this transaction's invalid. And if they moved in without a legally notarized release from the co-owner, that's trespassing." "Got it," Monica said firmly. "I'm on it right now." "You're not staying there alone, are you?" "I'll find a motel nearby." But Monica, they replaced the door. Cleared out all of Mom's things. Like she never existed. I heard her sigh on the other end, then her voice dropped low. "I promise you, Harmony. We're taking it all back. Every inch." I hung up, sitting motionless in the car. The sky was growing dark and raindrops clung to the windshield like 1,000 invisible eyes staring me down, daring me to fight for what was mine. But I had made Mom a promise. And I've never broken one. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman standing in the living room where Mom used to hang her wedding photo. I heard that man's smug voice claiming he was the rightful owner. It felt like a nightmare staged inside what used to be my sacred place. I stayed awake until morning. As the first light broke through the sparse trees, I left the motel and drove back to Mom's old house on the edge of town, the one she moved into when her health made mountain trips harder. The little house, with its faded tin roof and short wooden fence, still carried her breath. I hadn't returned since the funeral. The last time I stood on that porch, I was holding a vase of white lilies and whispering a vow: "I'll keep everything safe." The spare key was still hidden in the hollow under the frangipani pot. I opened the door and stepped into a space laced with light dust and the scent of aged wood. It was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. I walked straight into Mom's study. The small wooden drawers beneath the bookshelf were still intact. I wasn't searching for anything specific, just following a hunch as if Mom was somewhere in the room, guiding me with the breath of memory. A small walnut frame leaning in the corner caught my eye. The photo inside showed Mom standing among pine trees in the glow of sunset, holding a planting spade, her smile tired but peaceful. I picked up the frame. It felt heavier than usual. Tilting it slightly, I heard a faint clink. A sliding panel. I sat down, traced the wood edge, and with a gentle press, the back of the frame popped open, revealing a tiny hidden camera tucked inside the hollow. I stared at it as if I'd just found a piece of her soul. Careful, thoughtful, always prepared for the worst. Inside was a small memory card. I slipped it out, put it in my bag, and drove straight to the temporary apartment I was renting in town to check the files. Once the laptop booted up, I inserted the memory card. One folder appeared, cabin_logs. Inside were several videos recorded during Mom's final 2 months. Some were just footage of her walking around, sipping tea, reading. But one file stood out, guest under 4. I clicked it. The screen showed the cabin's living room, from the exact angle behind the frame. Franklin appeared, wearing a gray suit, holding a stack of papers, standing in the center of the room. Next to him were the same couple I'd met yesterday. They were inspecting every detail while Franklin spoke as if he were the sole owner. "This house has been under my full management since my wife passed," he said smoothly. "Her daughter lives out of state and hasn't shown any interest. I want to sell quickly, so I'm offering a generous price." I gripped the armrest of the chair. Mom hadn't even been gone long and he'd already brought strangers in, spinning lies, making deals. The video showed Franklin handing them the documents for signature. Page after page flipped. None of them mentioned a co-owner. My name wasn't there. My signature wasn't there. I paused the video, screenshotting the frame showing Franklin signing. The resolution was sharp enough to serve as evidence that he deliberately concealed key legal facts in the transaction. I opened my contacts and called Monica. She answered on the first ring. "Harmony, are you okay?" "I found the camera Mom hid in the photo frame," I said quickly, my voice trembling with rage. "And I've got a video of him bringing those two to the cabin, lying about the ownership. They signed the papers right there. My name isn't anywhere in that contract." I heard papers shuffling on her end, then Monica exhaled. "Send me the file right away. This proves he conducted a fraudulent transaction, deliberately withholding crucial information in a real estate deal. I've already taken screenshots of every frame. And I have the audio of him saying Mom gave him full control. A bold-faced lie. This just got a lot more serious. Monica said slowly. If they made payment without the consent of the co-owner, and the seller knowingly misrepresented facts, we can sue him for abuse of ownership and document fraud. And if your mom had written clauses in the trust, he's also violating inheritance conditions. The weight lifted slightly from my shoulders. I'll send everything today. Can you start the legal process? As soon as I get the files, I'll contact the county property office and verify the transfer record. And Harmony, I'm not surprised your mom installed that camera. She always knew what to be ready for. I hung up, opened my email, attached all the videos and images, and hit send. Then I sat still in front of the screen, my mind still spinning but finally grounded. Not because I thought this would be easy, but because I knew from this moment on Franklin was no longer standing on solid ground. Every step I took pushed him closer to the cliff he dug for himself. The next day at 3 p.m, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop in town when Monica called. She didn't waste time. I watched the entire camera footage. There's no doubt, Harmony. Franklin deliberately concealed the co-ownership information and violated the trust terms your mother set up. Her voice was firm, slicing through the fog I'd carried for days. I contacted the notary's office and the county land records department, Monica continued. The deed Franklin used has no acknowledgement from the co-owner, which means you. And by law, any sale of a co-owned property requires signatures from both parties. More importantly, the trust your mom created clearly prohibits transferring ownership of the cabin within 5 years of her death. And she's only been gone for less than 3 months. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of grief settle again. Mom wasn't even at peace, and everything she left was already being bartered like a lost trinket. What do we do now? I asked, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. First, I'm drafting an official cease and desist letter. It's going straight to Franklin with a copy sent to the couple occupying the cabin. It'll outline the legal basis, reaffirm your ownership rights, and warn of the consequences if they continue trespassing on the property. I heard every word like nails driven into the table. And what about Franklin? I asked. What if he keeps being stubborn? Then we sue him. A civil lawsuit for knowingly transferring property illegally, violating the trust agreement, and misusing inherited assets. With the footage from the hidden camera, the trust documents, and the incomplete notarized paperwork, I'm confident the court will side with you. I nodded slowly, even though Monica couldn't see me. Send the letter as soon as you can, Monica. Thank you. I'll draft it this afternoon, she replied. But Harmony, there's one thing I think you should do first. What is it? Thomas, Monica said softly. Your half-brother. You said you two lost touch after your mom married Franklin. But you know as well as I do, Franklin manipulated not just you but Thomas too. If there's ever a time to reconnect, it's now. Hearing Thomas's name stirred something deep inside me. It had been nearly 10 years. The last time I saw him was at our grandmother's funeral. He stood behind the rows of chairs, avoiding my eyes, and quietly slipped away without a word. As kids, Thomas had been a bright, book-loving boy, always close to me. But everything changed when Franklin entered our lives. Franklin constantly compared us, dropping seemingly harmless but poisonous remarks. So Harmony's always right, huh? Thomas, why can't you be more like your sister? Don't trust anyone but your stepfather, not even your sister. Thomas began to withdraw, eventually trusting Franklin completely. At 16, he ran away to live with a friend and never returned. I wrote letters, sent emails, even asked mutual friends about him, but no one knew where he was. Over time, I accepted that Thomas no longer wanted to be part of the family. That night, I sat for hours by the window of my temporary apartment, watching deep red clouds drift across the dusky sky. I reopened an old mailbox, one my mom had used to send photos of Thomas at his high school graduation, old snapshots of us as kids at the cabin, smiling before Franklin ever came into our world. I took a deep breath and searched Facebook, typing his name. His profile popped up within seconds. No profile picture, but the job title said, Thomas E. Crawford, electrical technician living in Boulder, Colorado. I wrote a short message. No begging. No guilt. Just, Thomas, it's Harmony. I need to see you. About the cabin. About Mom. And about what I've never said. I didn't expect a reply. But the next morning, just as I was pouring a cup of coffee, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number appeared. I answered, my hand trembling slightly. Harmony. A deep voice, a little hoarse, hesitant. It's Thomas. I froze for a moment, then said quietly, thank you for calling. He paused. Then, I got your message. I know about the cabin. I'm not surprised. Franklin, of course. I exhaled, a small weight lifting. Can we meet? There's a lot you need to know. And something I need to apologize for. Thomas agreed to meet at a small cafe in Boulder, just about an hour's drive from town. That afternoon we sat across from each other after more than a decade of silence. He looked different, neatly trimmed hair, eyes seasoned by life but still carrying a softness when he looked at me. I always knew he'd do something like this, Thomas said after I told him everything about the cabin. I saw how he slowly took Mom away from you. Then from me. But I was too young then. All I knew was to run. I took his hand. I never blamed you. Not once. Franklin turned all of us into strangers. But I believe this time he won't get away with it. Thomas nodded, his eyes drifting toward the window, where the mountains stretched across the horizon like silent witnesses to everything we had lost, and maybe everything we could still reclaim. 3 days after our meeting, I received a text from one of my aunts on my father's side. Franklin's inviting family for a dinner. Says it's about your mom's estate. Are you going? I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no immediately. I knew Franklin wasn't reaching out in good faith. But another part, the one tired of silence and manipulation, spoke up. I needed to be there. To make sure the story didn't get rewritten by the one who had twisted everything. I arrived 10 minutes late. The gathering was held at Uncle Donald's house. Mom's younger brother, a quiet carpenter who rarely got involved in family matters. When I walked in, about a dozen people were scattered around the living room. The coffee table was set with cookies and hot drinks. On the surface, it looked like a calm family gathering. But the tension in the air was sharp and undeniable. Franklin stood at the center of the room, speaking with the flair of a stage actor. He wore a beige turtleneck, hair slicked back, his face drawn into a look of exaggerated weariness. You all know, Franklin said, placing a hand over his chest. I cared for Ira, my wife, for nearly 20 years. After Henry passed, I took care of everything. I never asked for anything. But now Harmony, her daughter from a previous marriage, is trying to claim the entire cabin for herself, even though I was the one who stood by Ira until her final breath. Soft sighs rippled through the room. Aunt Clara, my mom's cousin, glanced at me with an unmistakable trace of judgment. Franklin went on, his tone lowering for dramatic effect. I'm exhausted. I sold the cabin to cover Ira's medical bills. I just wanted to let go. But Harmony, she filed a lawsuit against me, suing her own stepfather. Tell me, isn't that cruel? I clenched my fist. The room filled with murmurs. A cousin asked, Harmony, are you really suing Uncle Franklin? Why take it that far? I stood tall, my voice calm but firm. Because it's my mother's cabin. And I'm the legal co-owner. Franklin had no right to sell it, especially with forged documents and concealed information. What I'm doing is protecting my mother's legacy and final wishes. Franklin chuckled dryly and turned to me. Oh, here we go again. Legal this, ownership that. Isn't it funny how the person who shared Ira's life for all those years is the one being pushed out? Did you really share her life? I asked. Or were you just the man who lived in her house, spent her money, and controlled her through fear and guilt? The laughter and whispers died. Franklin stepped closer, his voice sharp. You weren't there when I rushed her to the hospital. You didn't see me take care of her while you were off living comfortably in another state. Then another voice cut through the room, deep and steady. And no one saw the nights you screamed at my mother in the kitchen, shattered glasses on the floor, or left her crying in the bathroom for hours. Everyone turned. Thomas stood in the doorway holding a large envelope. He stepped inside and placed it on the table, his voice unwavering. I'm Thomas, Ira's son. I've stayed quiet for years. But today I won't let him twist the truth any longer. Franklin froze, his face flushing red. Thomas opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photos. This is a photo of my mom in 2018, with a bruise around her right eye. Here's the emergency room intake from a private clinic. She said she slipped. But I heard the shouting that night. And this, he unfolded a piece of paper. is a page from her journal. Dated June 12th. She wrote, "Franklin shattered the teapot again last night. I didn't dare speak up. I was scared he'd lose control again." The room fell into absolute silence. Aunt Clara stammered, "Ira really wrote that?" Thomas nodded. She never dared say it out loud, but she left signs. That cabin was the only place she could truly be herself. It was where she escaped from him. I looked around. The once skeptical eyes were shifting. The sighs turned into awkward silence. Franklin stood frozen, his face drained of all color. I stepped forward, locking eyes with him. "My mother had a chance to get away from you once, but she wasn't strong enough. I am. I won't let you repeat what you did, to anyone. Especially not in the place she once called home." Franklin didn't answer. He turned away and pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll, trying to escape the stares burning into him. But I knew. That polished mask of moral superiority he'd worn for years was cracking. And it was my brother who struck the first blow. I was still standing in Uncle Donald's yard when Monica called. Her voice was clear, short, and sharp like a blade. "I've got news. And you're not gonna like it." I stepped back into a mossy corner of the garden and sat down on an old bench, listening in silence. Monica didn't wait for me to ask. "The real estate agent Franklin used is named Laura Finch. Her office is down in South Denver. I just called her." At first she sounded confused, claimed everything was legal and by the book. But her tone lacked conviction. Like she was hiding something. I frowned. Did she even look at the co-ownership documents? Did she verify anything with the notary office? "That's the thing," Monica said slowly. "I sent her a formal email as an attorney requesting all documents tied to the transaction." After nearly an hour of silence, she called me back. And admitted Franklin had implied the cabin was entirely his. When I brought up professional ethics and her legal responsibility under Colorado state law, she went quiet for a long time. My heartbeat pounded. "Implied? What do you mean?" "Franklin promised her an off-the-record bonus if she overlooked the unclear ownership situation. And she took it." Monica paused. "Laura Finch accepted $8,000 in cash, no paper trail. And she's terrified now, because if this goes under review she could lose her license permanently." I gripped the bench rail. My chest felt like someone had poured boiling water across it. I wasn't just fighting one greedy man. I was up against an entire web of calculated silence and self-serving deception. "Does she have proof?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "She does," Monica replied. "The moment I threatened to file a complaint with the Colorado Real Estate Commission, she sent me a string of internal emails, a scanned copy of the deed transfer, without your signature, and most importantly, an audio recording of her call with Franklin." I could hear Monica shuffling files on the other end. She didn't play it loudly, but just enough for me to catch a chilling fragment. "As long as you don't ask too many questions, Finch, I'll make sure there's a little bonus in it for you. It's simple. My wife passed, the daughter lives in another state and doesn't really care." Franklin's voice. Unmistakable. Calculated. A chill ran down my spine. Not because I was shocked, but because the suspicions I'd carried for so long were now confirmed, piece by piece, laid bare and undeniable. "I need that file," I said. "The audio, the emails, the documents. We need to submit them to the court." "Already secured," Monica said. "I'll prep a supplementary complaint. As for the couple living in the cabin now, I've sent a formal warning. They've been notified that they may be occupying fraudulently transferred property and could face legal removal if they don't cooperate." I exhaled and looked up at the overcast sky through the trees. The wind rustled faintly through the leaves, carrying a chill of early autumn. Suddenly, I remembered the first time Mom brought me to the cabin after Dad died. She said, "There's nothing here but trees, quiet, and the truth." I hadn't understood back then. But now I did. The simplest places often hold the most important things. And they're also the easiest to lose if we don't fight for them. "Monica," I said slowly, "do you think we have a real shot at winning? With the evidence we've got?" "Extremely high," she said firmly. "We have the law, your brother's testimony, your mom's journal, the photos, the video, and now the realtor's files. Franklin has nowhere left to hide." I didn't say anything else. I just thanked her quietly and ended the call. What I held in my hands was no longer just an emotional battle. It had become a legitimate counterattack, founded, legal, and supported. A fortress of lies had just been breached, and those who stayed silent for years would have to lift their heads and face the truth. That weekend, I got a call from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. The caller was Inspector Andrew Miller from the Civil Property Fraud Division. His voice was deep and steady, with the measured care of someone who'd seen far too many scams unfold. "Harmony Daniels," he began. "This is Inspector Miller. We've received documentation from attorney Monica Langley concerning the Pinecrest Ridge cabin and alleged fraudulent transfer. Based on preliminary evidence, we have grounds to open a criminal investigation." I froze for a moment. Even though I'd braced myself, hearing a law official confirm that Franklin, my former stepfather, was now officially under criminal investigation still made my chest tighten. Not out of fear, but out of grief. For my mother. For all the years she lived in silence under a man who never knew what unconditional love really meant. "I'm prepared to fully cooperate," I said, keeping my voice level. "We'll need you to provide the original audio recordings, videos, deed transfer documents, and all related communications. You may also submit a written statement. The more detailed, the better. If needed, I can send someone to collect the materials. I'll bring them to your office in person," I said. "I want everything to be clear. I don't want him hiding behind another curtain of moral excuses like he's done to my family for years." "Very well," Inspector Miller said. "I'll schedule the earliest appointment next week." I ended the call, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes. I hadn't come this far just to reclaim a cabin. I was reclaiming the truth. And my mother's dignity. Just a few hours later, my phone rang again. I looked at the screen and a chill passed through me. "Franklin." I answered, saying nothing for a few seconds. "Are you satisfied now?" His voice was hoarse, strained, like he was holding back fury. "I just got notice from the county police. You really plan to destroy everything, Harmony?" "I'm not destroying anything," I replied slowly. "I'm exposing what you did. I took care of your mother when no one else did. I was the only one left in that house, handling her medicine, the doctors, all the bills. And now you drag me into court like I'm some criminal? You're tearing this family apart." I stayed silent for a few seconds. Maybe he thought that sentence would make me tremble, feel guilty, maybe even regretful. But all it did was make the distortion in his thinking even clearer to me. "I didn't destroy this family," I replied, my voice steady like a cold lake. "A family is a place of unconditional love, where truth isn't sacrificed for convenience, where fear and guilt aren't used as control. You can call it a family, but all it ever was a shell built to protect selfishness." "You don't understand my situation," he nearly hissed. "I have nothing left. Everything's gone. The money, the reputation, now even my relatives' trust. What more do you want?" "I want you to take responsibility," I said, "for what you did to my mother. To me. To Thomas. And to your own conscience if there's any of it left." On the other end of the line was a long silence. Then came the dry, sharp click of the call ending. I placed the phone on the table, my heart beating slowly but with the weight of a hammer. Franklin had dropped the mask. The cracks had started from the inside. And truth, once it begins to show, cannot be hidden again. That evening, Thomas and I sat in my temporary apartment, going over every piece of documentation we would submit to Inspector Miller. Thomas handed me an envelope filled with old messages from Mom, short notes, a few handwritten letters she never sent. I read every word, feeling like I was right back with her in that old kitchen, listening to her stories under the warm yellow light. "Do you think she knew this would happen?" Thomas asked in a low voice. "I think she hoped it wouldn't," I said. "But she was clear-minded enough to prepare just in case. She left clues, cameras, papers, like she was placing a torch in my hand, telling me to carry it if the darkness returned." Thomas nodded, eyes drifting somewhere far away. "And this time," I said softly, "I won't let the dark win." We sat there a long time after that. We didn't say another word. But it wasn't needed. Everything had already been said, in the silence of two children once torn apart, now quietly mending the last pieces of a legacy our mother left behind, not in silver or gold but in grit and integrity. Over 3 weeks after the official investigation concluded, I walked into courtroom number 3 at the Jefferson County Courthouse on a gray morning. The light pouring through the tall glass windows stretched across worn wooden benches, casting the kind of quiet resolve you only find in places where truth can't be avoided. Monica sat beside me, one hand on a thick folder, while across the room Franklin sat just a few feet away in a worn-out suit, hands clasped, eyes blank but steady. There was no jury. This was a civil hearing, but the tension in the room was thick enough to match any criminal case I'd seen on the news. The presiding judge was Eleanor Hughes, a New England native with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her movements slow but precise. She glanced at both sides, then gently tapped the gavel. This court is now in session to hear the case of plaintiff Harmony Daniels versus defendant Franklin Moore, concerning allegations of forged property transfer documents, unlawful ownership claims, and financial fraud related to the real estate at Pinecrest Ridge. Plaintiff's representative, you may begin. Monica stood up. Every word she spoke landed with clarity and precision, like a perfectly timed melody. Cabin ownership history, trust conditions, proof of the illegitimate transaction. Then it was my turn. I took a deep breath, stood up, my palms slightly damp, but my voice didn't shake. My name is Harmony Daniels, the only daughter of Mrs. Ira Daniels, the lawful owner of the cabin at Pinecrest Ridge. Before she passed, my mother transferred partial ownership of the property to me. The remaining portion was held in a trust with strict conditions prohibiting transfer within 5 years. I opened my laptop and played the video from the hidden camera. There was Franklin signing a stack of papers, saying he had full ownership because the daughter lives in another state and doesn't care. The courtroom fell utterly silent. This is video evidence of Franklin Moore bringing a buyer into the home and proceeding with a forged transaction. Not only did he lack legal authority, but he also deliberately withheld co-ownership information in an attempt to steal property that wasn't his. Then I played the audio recording of our phone call where Franklin snarled, "You're killing this family." I kept my voice steady. My family already lost our mother. What's left is her honor, and I will protect that. When I sat down, Monica gave a nod to Thomas. My brother wore a white shirt and a pale gray tie. He stood up and walked to the witness stand, eyes fixed on the judge. My name is Thomas Crawford. I'd like to testify about something that happened when I was 17. I'd been accepted to Colorado Institute of Technology with a nearly full scholarship. But I needed an upfront deposit to secure my spot. My mom agreed to access a savings account in my name, but Franklin, who was my financial guardian at the time, transferred all the funds into another account before I could use them. When I asked, he said he'd invested it for me. But the money vanished. I lost the scholarship. A few gasps echoed in the courtroom. Thomas pulled out a folder. Bank statements, school letters, handwritten notes from our mother about the incident. I left home not long after that, Thomas continued. But I never forgot. And I'm not here today for revenge. I'm here to stand for the truth. Judge Hughes scribbled a note, then looked up. Does the defendant wish to respond? Franklin stood. He didn't look at me. Didn't look at Thomas. Just bowed his head slightly and said, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought that girl, Harmony, didn't care about her mother. I thought the cabin was useless sitting there. The judge interrupted, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. The law does not operate on personal assumptions, Mr. Moore. It operates on facts and evidence. And today that evidence is overwhelming. She paused for a few seconds. The room held its breath. After reviewing the documentation, testimonies, and conduct of the involved parties, this court finds Franklin Moore guilty in civil court of the following: forging documents, knowingly hiding co-ownership information, and carrying out an illegal property transaction. I closed my eyes briefly. My heart was still pounding, but no longer out of fear. This was something else. Something deeper. The court orders the defendant to reimburse all financial damages caused by the fraudulent transaction, and to cover all legal expenses incurred by the plaintiff. Furthermore, the defendant is permanently prohibited from accessing the cabin at Pinecrest Ridge in any form, effective immediately. Franklin didn't react. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast. The illusion of control he'd built around himself for decades was collapsing, in utter silence. The judge tapped her gavel. This hearing is adjourned. I remained seated, hands resting on my knees, eyes burning but dry. I wasn't happy. I wasn't triumphant. I just felt something quietly shift inside me, like someone had finally opened a door that had been stuck shut for far too long. Thomas turned toward me and placed his hand on my shoulder. I looked at him and nodded. In that moment, I realized I hadn't just won a case. I'd reclaimed something far greater, faith in justice. And my mother's memory could finally rest in peace. 3 weeks after the hearing, Thomas, Monica, and I returned to the cabin for the first time since ownership was officially restored. No more unfamiliar footsteps on the wooden floor, no more artificial breath of those who once tried to make this place theirs. Just the wind whispering through the pines, the familiar click of the old lock as I turned the key, and the dry scent of pine wood rushing in as the door creaked open. We stood on the threshold, none of us speaking for several minutes. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting soft lines across the dust-covered table, floor, and bookshelves. I stepped inside, running my fingers gently along the armrest of the chair where Mom used to sit reading letters, then glanced over at the wooden wall where we once hung family photos. Everything was still there, just waiting for time and love to bring it back to life. "How much of the past do you want to keep here?" Thomas asked softly, his footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. "Not all of it," I said, turning to look at him. "Just the parts that were real." We started with the small things. Monica helped me take down the cold gray curtains that couple had hung and replace them with the cream-colored linen ones my mother had sewn. Thomas cleaned the windows, then spent hours repainting the porch. I carefully wiped down the only photo frame that had survived. Mom standing in the middle of a pine grove holding a basket of flowers, her head tilted gently toward the camera. Her eyes were both kind and resolute. I placed it back on the shelf in its original spot, as if time had never been interrupted. Each passing day cleared away another layer of dust, rebuilt a corner of memory, gently closed another old wound. On the 8th day, as the early spring sun began shining through the treetops, slowly melting the frost on the porch roof, I sat at the wooden desk by the window, opened my laptop, and began drafting the proposal to establish a foundation. I named it Giri, my mother's name, writing it in all capital letters with the reverence it deserved. The purpose of the foundation was to support women escaping emotionally abusive and manipulative relationships, offering both legal assistance and temporary housing. I wrote the first few lines of the mission statement, my heart lighter with each word, as if someone were quietly lifting me up. Mom had stayed silent out of fear, out of shame, thinking silence was the best way to keep a family from falling apart. I wanted other women to know they weren't alone, that there were doors waiting to open if they could just find the courage to step beyond fear. Monica agreed to serve as the foundation's legal advisor. Thomas volunteered to manage the tech side, website design, community fundraising. I used the portion of the assets Franklin was ordered to repay as seed funding. It wasn't much, but it carried all the weight of memory and awakening. Every afternoon after our work was done, we'd gather around the wood stove like we used to years ago. Thomas told me about his days after running away from home, sleeping in friends' garages, once believing he didn't matter enough to come back. Monica shared a story about a single mother of 4 she helped escape her ex-husband using a tiny clause in a housing statute. I listened, smiling, and more clearly than ever, I understood this cabin had never just been wood and stone. It was a place where lost things found their way back to wholeness. One weekend night, the air turned chilly early. I made a pot of hot cocoa, poured 3 mugs, and quietly slipped into the living room while Thomas and Monica kept chatting on the porch. I sat in the old armchair, Mom's wool blanket draped across my legs. The fire crackled softly, flames casting slow reflections on the ceiling like faint memories still glowing. I lifted the cocoa mug, letting the steam warm my face, gentle like a hand once rested on my cheek when I was a child. I looked toward the photo frame still standing on the shelf, her gaze meeting mine through the thin layer of glass, so vivid it felt alive. "I kept my promise, Mom," I whispered, my voice so soft only the fire could hear. There was no reply. Just the kind of quiet that holds no threat, no unease. The quiet of a home that had once been violated, but was now reclaimed. Of someone who had once been dismissed, but now stood tall and spoke their truth. Of a past cracked and broken, but from which a deeper, stronger, freer life had begun to grow. I don't know what you listening to this story might take from all I've lived through. Maybe you've stood at the edge between silence and resistance. Maybe you've been called ungrateful, too cold-hearted, simply for standing up for what's right. But I believe all of us eventually face the question: do we choose to preserve someone else's illusion of peace, or choose the truth for ourselves? I didn't take the easy road, but I chose the road my mother, if she were still here, would take my hand, smile, and say, "You did the right thing." What about you? If you've ever been in a place where the line between duty and hurt became blurry, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your own story. You never know, some woman out there might be waiting to read the very words you write. And if what I've shared gave you something meaningful, even just the feeling of being understood, hit subscribe and stay with me as we continue this journey through the hidden corners of family, memory, and courage.